Today, we will be looking at specifically ag tech and its impact on rural communities. We've got the fortune of having a couple of folks from Roper Solutions that will be joining us today to talk about a product and a solution set that they've been working on and building on. And then we'll tackle this idea of how ag tech, what the importance is and what the implications are of ag tech in rural communities. I do want to recognize a couple of folks. First of all, Jennifer Harris, who runs and heads up the Connected Nation Texas program. Jennifer, thanks for taking a chance to join us. I think you typically try to join these workshops when you have the opportunity, but certainly want to take the chance to say thanks. And anything you'd want to make note of today before we get into this?
Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to be here today. This is a topic that's really exciting to me personally, because I grew up on a ranch with cattle in Denton County. And so I'm excited to learn more about this and hope everyone else has a great time learning today.
Thank you, Jennifer. Maeve Garrigan is the founder, inventor, and CEO of Roper, a tech company that makes encrypted sensors and wearables, including Roper Tag, Roper Smart Ranch, and Patch, which offers off-grid texting, GPS, and activity monitoring with end-to-end encryption. Maeve grew up on a farm herself in Oregon and raised beef cattle and sheep before becoming a first-generation college student and earning both a bachelor's and master's degree from the Johns Hopkins University. Before founding Roper in 2018, she served 16 years as a technology advisor and lead engineer for elite military commands, specializing in robotics, sensors, artificial intelligence, and mobility systems. And Maeve, we welcome you. We're excited to hear from you today. I had the opportunity to talk with your COO, Dana DeCoster, who is on with us as well. And I'm excited to number one, to hear what you have to say. And then, as we talked about earlier, just kind of digging into this conversation around technology and ag tech and the impact it can have at a local level.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction, Wes. I really appreciate it and appreciate the opportunity to visit with everyone today. So before we get started, I want to make sure that people can actually see the presentation that I'd like to give. Is that a thumbs up? We're good to go? Excellent. Good to know. So bear with me. I don't use Zoom very often. But usually I use Google. So hopefully it goes smoothly. And just for everyone on the line, I have about 10 slides to share, and we'll be working through this. And then at the end of the presentation, I'll be happy to take any questions. We can go back and look at various slides, discuss, etc. And one thing, just as before we get started, is one of the important points about this is that this is a specific use case for Internet of Things type technology. So you may be aware of people using Internet of Things or IoT and other applications, such as monitoring, oil and gas infrastructure, soil moisture monitors, etc. So this is a way that we have employed that type of technology to monitor cattle. As if you're a cattle rancher, you're familiar with the challenges of knowing where is the beef and how is the beef. And that's what we are addressing in this specific application of Internet of Things. So with that said, let's get started. So as we said, we're Roper, and our goal is to revolutionize beef production with advanced Internet of Things technology. And moving into it, let's see here. So a quick bit on the origin. So as Wes mentioned, I spent 16 years supporting elite military commands. And after 16 years without a lot of vacation, I needed to take a break. And so gave away everything I owned, bought a four-wheel drive, and went on an extended camping trip in New Mexico and started visiting with ranchers there. And one of the things that I discovered was the same management issues that they had, that I had when I was living on a farm in Oregon, decades prior, they still had, whether it was losses due to predators, whether it was losses, first year heifer having calving issues. And, the question was like, hey, can you help us see where our cattle are? And, I thought, hey, I've worked on things that are harder and weirder, in my military career than tracking cattle. So it sounds like a great solution and a great way to really kind of pay it forward and advanced technology in a tremendously underserved market. I mean, as everybody on the line here probably knows, that the rural market has really been ignored and underserved by advances in technology. And that's something that we as a company and me personally, professionally, want to change. So came up with the idea for a cattle tracking device, and much of that seed money came directly in forms of grants from the New Mexico Small Business Assistance Program. So over a course of 2 years, we received $240,000 in grants from that program, and tremendously grateful, because we wouldn't be here today if not for them. So the problem that we're solving is, where's the beef? So there's over 50 million beef cattle in the United States, and $78 billion in cash receipts annually as projected for 2022. And that's, those are some really big numbers. You think of the value of a cow, typical value is, $1,200. You have cows that are worth more. But it's kind of crazy when you think about, in this day and age, that you have better tracking traceability on, the shoes that you bought on Amazon last week than you do for this, cow that's worth over $1,000, or a herd that's worth millions of dollars. And, these cattle are still inspected and managed manually, which, can be very inefficient. They're out in the field, they're wandering around the woods, or they're interacting with, predators or stressors, or, potential theft. And there's just these, massive inefficiencies, whether it's, knowing where the cow is and how the cow is doing, and being able to effectively, take care of your animals. And so that overall death and disease loss is around $16 billion a year. And that's due to, again, disease, stressors, and unexpected death or theft. So there's some really big numbers. So I wanted to break it down a little bit into a case study. So Tanya here has 1,200 cattle on 50,000 acres, so a lot of cows, a lot of land. She's a seed stock producer, so she's just a higher value animal. And she wants to know where her cows are so she can practice artificial insemination. And one of the things that they had an issue with this particular ranch is they constantly were searching for cattle that weren't in the right location, of just knowing which cows in which pastures so they can effectively manage the cow. Even though it's a very simple problem, it's a very difficult problem to solve. Sometimes the simplest problems are the most difficult to solve. And it's definitely something that ranchers encounter. And so for her, knowing where the cow was and how the cow was doing allowed her to, manage more effectively, and not knowing that really costs her a lot of money. So our solution is cowboying as a service. You've probably heard of software as a service, but we're able to offer, cowboying as a service because we're able to place a tag on the animals worn on their ear. I've got, here's our current version of the tag. It attaches with a standard ear tag button, goes on the top of the ear, and it has a GPS location. It has monitoring for activity, so you can measure the animal's health, as well as being able to see if they're having any kind of issues. And because you know their location, you know if they're outside of an assigned area or outside of an assigned pastures. That really directly addresses these issues that Tanya and other ranchers encounter. So here's a quick tech overview for those of you who like to geek out on these things. So we have a GPS receiver, so something similar you might have in your cell phone. We use a device that's called an IMU that combines an accelerometer and a gyroscope. And we're using machine learning on that data. So it's very similar to what you might have in a Fitbit or an Apple Watch in being able to assess the activity of the animal. And it's wildly effective. It's far more effective than other methods that we've had in the past. This technology that we're using now, didn't exist, 5 years ago. As well as with our communications, is we're able to have very long range, low power communication. So we're able to have a device that, the battery lasts for 2 years, and we're able to communicate, multiple times a day from that animal, collect that data and assess that data, and then communicate it to the user in the mobile phone app that you saw on the previous screen. And one of the other issues is being able to pair that tag to that animal. And so we have a QR code that's on the tag that's scanned at the time of installing the tag, so you know which animal is with which tag. So just for those of you who are in the beef cattle industry, there are other smart tags out there for beef cattle. It's notable that ours is the only one that has GPS. These others do provide location, but it's based on radio communications vis-a-vis a base station. So, you have a range issue as well as a potential accuracy issue. And so these are, again, some options that are out on the market. Merck, which is, a huge, multinational animal health company, has spent quite a bit of money in the past several years to acquire technologies in this space, such as the SCR dairy cattle estrus monitoring tag that you see up there. Actually got one right here. And we also a feedlot tag. So there's some interesting movements in this space, but a couple things that jump out for me on this is, again, they don't have the accuracy either in activity monitoring, which correlates to animal health. They don't have the accuracy in terms of GPS. And then the pricing is really weird. Like, you have to buy the tags, and you have to buy, the connectivity and the base station. And I find it confusing. And so I can only imagine for people who don't spend their entire day thinking about this, how confusing it can be for other people. So it's certainly not an intuitive pricing model. So the way we've addressed that is to sort of like when you get your cable, you get your hardware or you get your software, you get your connectivity, and you're just paying a flat rate based on that. So we have two different pricing schemes. So one is a feeder model and one is a breeder model. And those are just, feeder is intended for feeder animals that will be slaughtered within a 24-month period. That's typical. Usually if it's a grass-fed animal, they'll be slaughtered when they're about that age. If they're not grass-fed, they're slaughtered a little bit younger. And then for a breeder animal, you want to know the animal's worth more, and so it's worthwhile investment to determine some of these aspects regarding their fertility, their calving status, et cetera, simply because those are all extremely valuable when you have breed animals and you want to make sure that they're performing optimally. So kind of, again, coming back to our friend Tanya, so this is something where, it really, comes down to some, bottom line. It really does, impact her bottom line, and being able to recover lost cattle and being able to improve fertility. Basically, fertility is like, if you're able to improve your fertility, you have more baby calves, and more baby calves means more money. And she's able to cut her artificial insemination supplies because she's not having to go in multiple times and inseminate a cow multiple times because of the precision of the estrus monitoring. So it breaks out to, a 4x ROI without having, it's return on investment, without having to actually include all the management time that's saved. You're not driving around looking for a cow, like where the cow is. You're not driving around looking for the cow and wondering how the cow is doing. All of that up front at the beginning of the day and throughout the day, versus guesswork, driving around looking for the cow, hoping she's okay, taking a guess of how she's doing. So something that really is, I think something that, again, as I mentioned earlier, the rural market has really been tremendously underserved by technology. That's a whole other discussion of maybe why that's been happening. But it really does impact people's bottom line. And it's something where we want to look at building resilient agricultural and rural economies. We really have to be intentional about how we're applying these technologies to help producers, whether they're a beef rancher or crop, growing row crops or growing something else, and being able to apply this Internet of Things technologies to help their operations. Because as you can see here in this case study, it really improves the bottom line in ways that, it just really changes business as usual. It's a complete game changer. And, folks on the line who are, currently in ag, there's a lot of pressure, whether it's, market price manipulation, or whether it's, land values increasing, or urban encroachment. There's a lot of, challenges that are being faced by the ag industry right now. And, a major way to balance against that is being able to apply technology in a way that, again, is very intentional, very tailored, very contextual, and being able to really apply that and take value away from that. So this that concludes my my presentation. So we've got some contact information here for you. We've got, if you want to check out our website, we have a few articles on there regarding applying smart tech to a ranching situation. So again, any questions? Anyone want to loop back and look at any of the slides that we've gone through today?
Yeah, Maeve, thanks. I've got, I don't have any questions that have come in at this point, but I will. There's just a handful of folks on to start with, and so what we'll do is if you want to raise your hand, I will be happy to unmute you. There's just a handful. I would ask to kind of mute yourself on and off if you need to once you speak or ask a question. And so if there are any questions, please feel free to raise your hand. I do know, I'll point out, I know we've got at least one cattleman on here, as Jennifer Harris mentioned earlier, that she grew up on a farm. There happens to be another Harris on here that may have guided much of her early years. Mr. Harris is on, and so I know he's on a ranch, and we may have others, but certainly feel free to raise your hand, and we'll unmute, and you can ask questions, and we can discuss, and if not, we'll start kind of digging into some additional questions and some other things that we wanted to try to discuss as well. We did have a question come in. It says, do the tags require internet? And so, Maeve, I know that having talked with Dana, I have a little bit better understanding there for the technology, but you all kind of aggregate everything at a local level, which can then go back up. But I'll let you explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can handle this a couple different ways. The way that this system is currently configured is that the tags themselves have their own radio in them. So they are communicating back to a base station, and the base station itself has internet connectivity. And we're able, right now, we have a range of 1.5 miles. We're anticipating a range of 3 miles between the ear tag back to that base station, which provides the internet backhaul. So the internet backhaul is how we collect all the data and then put that onto the app for you to be able to view and interact with that cattle's data. So it does require internet. However, there's different ways to provide that. So we've used Wi-Fi. So if the base station is by a ranch house or an outbuilding that has Wi-Fi, we can use that. We can use a internet modem. So something where through a cell provider, if there's cell coverage, we can use a cell modem at that base station. And then if you are in an extremely remote area where you do not have cell or Wi-Fi, then we would use satellite internet base station. So that's something that Viasat is our preferred vendor for that. So that gives us that direct satellite communications back through and gets us that internet connectivity in extremely remote areas. So that's pretty much, they cover the entire United States, pretty much the entire world. We can get that internet coverage back, but the tags themselves do not have an internet connectivity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and there's a follow-up question here, Mr. Campbell. I see the question is a drone necessary to collect data, or is it more like what you find on my phone? And I think maybe you've kind of answered to that. I guess with that range being relatively short, would there, I guess to expand the distance with which you're collecting data, do you just expand kind of the on farm or on operation network, or how do you address that, I guess?
Well, I gotta say, the first time I've heard someone say that over a mile is short, but if you say so.
I say in comparison to when you recognize, like if you're talking about, say, a wireless network, a mobile wireless network, a
Right.
mile is in comparison to, what may be, even 5 or 6 miles from a large tower site. How do you manage those broader distances across a ranch? I guess is what I would is
Right.
getting at there.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think so. When you are thinking about, I think, in our kind of, especially in an urban area where you have a lot of kind of continuous connectivity everywhere, you're not necessarily aware of all the infrastructure that's in place that provides that connectivity. So you're just like, oh, I just have cell service in all of Austin. So but that's because you literally have cell towers everywhere, right? So I think it's important to remember that it just doesn't like magically appear that there's, there is that infrastructure in place and that's intentionally there to provide coverage. And oftentimes you see that proliferation of cell towers or other forms of infrastructure that really gives you that strong connectivity and that overlap. So, similar, our base stations are similar to a cell tower, albeit many, many, many times smaller. And so it's something that, is literally fits in a travel size soap dish. It's that small. And then we have an antenna that we use as well. So in that similar, line of thinking is that, we do provide, currently providing 1.5 mile range from the base station. And if there were, let's say you're leasing, you own one pasture in one area and then you own another pasture that's, 10 miles away or 20 miles away or, heck, even in another state, right? Like that's something where we would provide the hardware that you need to provide that coverage there. So if, you've got a pasture in Oklahoma, we would, put in a base station in Oklahoma, we would have internet backhaul to Oklahoma, and you could be sitting at home in Texas on your lazy boy, seeing where your cattle are in Oklahoma.
Sure.
So it is our intent, like again, with that pricing model and the way that we're bundling it, is to make it sort of, transparent to the user. It's not like, oh, well, I've got to put in another base station, so I'm going to charge you more. Like that's not how we're going about doing it, because I don't think that's helpful to the consumer. And I personally don't like being nickel and dime, so I wouldn't want to do that to someone else. So with the drones are, obviously it's extremely powerful capability, but they also are limited. So everything has its trade-offs and benefits. And with a drone, it could be very useful to be able to get eyes on. So one of our kind of future implementations that we've been talking about, we want to test out, is that, we're able to give that high level of fidelity of where the cow is and how the cow is doing. You can't necessarily know that with a drone unless you have like persistent drone overflight and then, camera analysis, which is going to be really expensive. You're not going to be able to see where all your cows are 24/7, and then be able to see how the cow is doing, right? So we're able to pinpoint where the cow is, how the cow is doing. And then because you have the GPS coordinates of where the cow is, then that makes it much easier to fly a drone out to look at her if you want to, right? And that's something that could be extremely useful for folks who are in extremely remote or rugged terrain. Like let's say the cow's on the other side of a canyon, and it may take you hours horseback or side by side to get out there and look at the cow. But if you can just fly a drone out to look at her, get eyes on, assess the situation, determine the severity. If it's something where there's even like legal implications, like if there's someone's animal or a wolf or someone's trying to rustle your cattle, it'd be very useful to have that camera imagery of seeing what's happening in the moment to your animals. So the drones are definitely a complementary capability. And it's something where I've seen some products out there that purport to assess cattle health and count cattle based strictly on drone footage. And I'm not saying that has no utility, but it's very difficult to get an accurate count strictly with a drone because cows like to hide. If you own cows, they know they hide. They got their little hidey holes. And then also just knowing how their health is, like that requires some assessment over time. You can't just get a snapshot of the cow and then be like, oh, she has a temperature. Like you wouldn't know.
Yeah. And Maeve, to I guess to add to that, I think that like to add to that question was, would it be possible to fly over the herd and collect data? In my mind, that would be almost like a mobile base station, right? Where
Right.
if say the herd were too far outside of that 1.5 mile range, could you fly into that area, collect data, and then bring the drone back? I think would be the kind of that idea.
One could. From a cost perspective, is not a cost or time effective way to collect that data. It's much easier and simpler. It's far less sexy. Like, I get people want to fly their drones around and like, that's exciting, but it's similar like with a cell phone. You could have drones flying around giving us cell phone coverage, but they don't. And there's reasons why, because it's just not as efficient, right? So similar here, yes, in theory, you could, we can't, and this is something we've done in the military market, where you are expeditionary and, you're in a conflict zone, so you can't go out and you don't want to be putting your infrastructure out there because it could be compromised. But in the United States, we can put a base station there. It's not that expensive. You don't need to worry about flying a drone. Drones cost a lot of money. Flying the drone costs money, takes time. There's just so many variables of what can go wrong when you're flying a drone, that it just makes everyone's life easier, and it's way cheaper if you just put the base station there.
So Maeve, I'm going to pivot a little bit. It's so much, like, we could sit here and talk about like the pure technology of it, the ideas, the what ifs,
right?
And we'll return to that in just a moment. But for some of the folks that we have on, and as I've explained to you and to Dana as well, that for us, it's about driving, creating some perspective that drives more and more towards the importance of connectivity and technology in a community, right? And so for a lot of our folks, we're used to, we talk about, it's fun to talk about big green machines that drive themselves. But when we recognize, how impactful it can be in the cattle market, to have this kind of technology, and while yes, individual tags don't need, or don't necessarily need connectivity, at least out to the internet, they have, it's when all of that data is combined and is driven back out to the internet, that you can pick out you can pick up your phone and you can make that communication from Texas to Oklahoma about that herd, or just you have that access to new databases and farm management systems and so on and so forth. And so it becomes so much a part of the day-to-day operations. And oftentimes, if we're not a part of this, if we're not in the middle of the ag industry, or if this isn't, if we don't operate a farm or a ranch, we don't always recognize how important it is. And you put some of those numbers into your presentation that help us further see, like, just the impact it can have even on a single ranch, but let alone in, say, a community that has several hundred ranches, the impact it could have from from an efficiency perspective, but also, as you mentioned earlier, sustainability. So with that, how vital do you think connectivity and technology is in the ag sector, and what's that impact for local communities?
Well, I think it's critical to the survival of rural and agricultural communities, simply because rural communities are based on agriculture. That's how our country started out. A couple of 100 years ago was having the citizen farmer. So the idea that we all were farmers and we all knew how to work the land and care for the land, and that's changed quite a bit over the past 100 years. And there's certainly been a lot of efficiencies and improvements, but I mean, as a citizen and a former farmer, I find it terrifying to see how, like, large corporations, like there's four meat packers that control the beef market in the United States, seeing their market manipulation, the way that they're kind of keeping cow-calf operators under their thumb. And you can extrapolate that to any number of every other aspect of ag. So for example, like Bill Gates Foundation is the largest private landholder in the United States, where they own, I think, close to 300,000 acres of arable, like actual crop land, which is quite a bit. And so you see these consolidations where the power is being removed, economic power, social power, political power is being removed from agricultural communities and the rural communities that those agricultural communities support. So a way to re-empower those communities is to give them these tech tools. So one of the things that's very important to us is data privacy and owning your own data and owning your own network. So we are providing that network connectivity, and we're analyzing your data. So we're not just spamming you with data. We're taking that data and we're turning that data rich environment into an information rich environment. So you're getting that actionable, useful information that you need to know so you can take action, in this case, to take care of your cattle. But we don't share that data, right? So like if you see all the data breaches with Apple or Google or Facebook, I mean, it's just egregious because these companies make their billions of dollars by exploiting consumer data. And that disempowers, all Americans and I'd say anyone who's using the internet right now or using those companies right now. So we want to make sure that we are, being intentional with how we're empowering people with data and information. We're not doing it in a way that's we're selling you one thing, but we're actually turning you into the product, which is what, like Facebook is doing or Apple has been doing. But we're also making sure that we're giving people the tools that they need. As you were saying, there's a tremendous amount of information that could be learned from data analytics. So with the cow example, knowing where your cow is, where she's grazing over time, so that can really help with pasture management, sustainability of that pasture, keeping a cow out of an area. Like if cows tend to go into river areas and stomp around and create, potential for flooding or environmental damage. So you can keep the cow out of that area so she's not doing that. So there's a lot of ways where you can, over time, that data is incredibly useful and powerful if you know how to be able to analyze it. You can, if you have garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have good data, you're not going to get a good output. If you don't know how to analyze your data, you're not going to get actionable information. But kind of looping back to the original question is, I think I believe, over my 20 plus years of being in tech and, seeing how you can use it to benefit humankind is absolutely critical in order to deal with a modern world. It's no longer 1776. We're no longer a nation of citizen farmers. You have to adapt. And part of that adaptation and being able to, overcome the challenges that the modern world is imposing on agricultural communities is to be able to adapt and implement technology in a way that's purposeful and serves your own interests. So, my advice to anyone who's living in a rural area or in ag and is curious about hey, what should I use or how should I use it? When you are looking at that and assessing it, being very careful about what's in it for me and what's in it for the person who's selling it to me. And are they really doing this with my best interest in mind? Do they understand my needs and what, my life and, what I need from technology, or are they just doing it to make a buck? Or are they doing it to exploit my data? So I think it is absolutely necessary and critical, but if you start making wrong steps, then you're just going to become, another resource is being exploited by large corporations.
That's a great answer, and we talk about it pretty often that it by implementing and like you and I love the way you put it, to be I guess cognizant of what that technology is doing for you, how you leverage it, and how it allows you to basically continue to do the things that you want to continue to do. That's what's so important, and it even becomes a cultural thing. In our rural communities, there's a certain culture, even from town to town. There's a little bit of a cultural difference, right? And so when you start to when we start to lose that, we lose a lot of what our communities, the makeup of the community. And so with the implementation of different technologies, and how they can allow you to not only maintain the kind of work that you've done, but to become, in some instances, become more efficient, more effective in it. There are really some big impacts to be had at a local level. Before we go, real quick, Maeve, what's next for Roper? You and I have talked about just briefly that it's basically it's hardware, and it's IoT, and it can be applied in so many different ways. But as far as the tag side of things, what's the next steps? I know you all, I think, are starting some pilots in the fall maybe. And then, but what else is there? I mean, so there's the hardware side. Obviously, you can do anything with software if you have good hardware and data. So where are you headed?
Oh, it's a great question, and thank you for asking it. So we did complete a pilot study last year with our beta version of the tag. So this is what that tag looked like, and that was actually one that was solar powered. At that time, after that, we decided to drop the solar panel just so it just didn't make sense in terms of like cost and size. We're like, hey, we can get a 2-year life out of, this, smaller tag that we've developed. So over, the coming year, we're going to be doing additional pilot studies at a research ranch to prove out this new design that we have. And we're extremely thankful to have quite a few ranchers who are very enthusiastic and excited about using our technology when it's available. So we'll kind of see how that plays out. I shared with you our pricing information, but we're also very aware that, we're not a marketing company, right? We're an engineering company, right? So, how much we want to bite off when it comes to actually selling things is a great question. And right now we're looking at, finding a strategic partner, someone who already has a direct sales force at a ranch. Probably somebody who's like in the veterinary or animal health space, because this is ultimately, an animal management, an animal health management tool. So finding a strategic partner who already has those relationships at the ranch level and is directly already part of those communities that we want to reach out to and support. And as you mentioned in the introduction, is we also have a sister product, which is our patch device. And this is just one version that we've built to make it look like an American flag. But this is similar to the cow tag. It allows you to communicate in an off-grid and encrypted manner. So our patches allow you to send text messages, send GPS, share map information, as well as monitor the activity of someone else with that patch in your network. And so that's a very powerful tool, whether you're working in an off-grid environment, whether you're oil and gas, or you're a rancher or Forest Service or wildland firefighter, a lot of different interesting applications, useful applications for that. As well as the military market. So based on, Dana, my background, the military market is kind of our happy home base. So we've got a couple events coming up in the next couple months where we will be, sharing more about, patch and some of the other kind of adjacent technologies we're working on. But the focus, again, is being able to have that secure, private, encrypted, off-grid communications, that Internet of Things, whether that thing is a cow or a person, or it could be, your side-by-side, or it could be some infrastructure. We've developed a very robust monitoring platform that's extremely low power, that can communicate over long ranges, that we can either configure to be a private and closed network, or we can include the internet backhaul, as we've discussed. We can provide that internet backhaul a variety of ways. So it's really exciting to see how that might, unfold over, the next year. And I think for us, it's exciting because, it takes a really long time to develop this. There's lots of people out there who are like, oh yeah, I can do this, I can build that, and I can track your cow and all this. And you start peeling the onion and there's nothing there. You're like, oh, it's like this smoke and mirrors. Well, we've actually built this stuff. We have actual circuit boards that we've made that, they've got all the chips and the GPS on it. And so now we're at the point where we can actually really start applying this in, these different environments, whether it's a ranch or a military environment or another, kind of rural off-grid type environment. And it's really, I think for all of us on the line, like you've seen how technology evolves, right? Like we got PCs back in like, the 80s and people are like, oh, it's great. It's like a typewriter. But now it's the other half of your brain that lives in your pocket, right? So technology evolves in ways that we can never predict. And so for us, it's really exciting to have built some like really powerful, interesting, useful technology that actually works, that solves actual problems for real people, and being able to see kind of how that unfolds, as we start, kind of releasing it out into the wild is extremely exciting. So I think, I'm excited. I was, excited to have this conversation today because, we think broadband, you're not necessarily thinking about kind of what's happening in that last mile of communications with the IoT, but you can do a lot of really interesting things with IoT, and you don't have the broadband connection to that sensor, but you do have that broadband connection at that base station potentially, right? So sure. There's a lot of really, now that we can kind of push those fingers of sensing out, how can we apply that in ways that will, empower these rural communities and enable them to be prosperous and resilient in the coming decades?
That's a really good way to finish this up, Maeve. I appreciate it. And really, I have enjoyed getting to know you, as well as again Dana DeCoster, who's on and being quiet. And it's a conversation that we have, Connected Nation has in our communities all the time, is how to continue to be resilient and remain an important factor in the conversation around what's happening in our economies, and this drives directly towards that. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and close this up today, but I will send this recording out once I've got it and kind of clean it up a little bit. I'll send the recording around. Certainly feel free to reach out to me or directly to Maeve or Dana at hello@ropertag.com. And with that, I'll close this down. Everyone have a great day.